Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way.
Welcome to Footwork.
All right. So, Adrian, welcome to Footwork. To give us a start, or for the listeners, can you tell us where you're from, where you are now, and what you're currently doing?
All right. My name is Adrian. I'm from Vienna, and I'm a nutritional scientist, degreed at the University of Vienna. My main focus with my work is on epigenetics and the impact of certain food components on the epigenome of humans. And I do research on these things myself in the laboratories, but also do a lot of research online, collecting a lot of data, and present my knowledge also on my Instagram handle at Rubio Fuerte, which is
legendary.
So why I'm on this podcast, I guess. And that's what I'm doing to get a little into to focus a little bit on my past as well. I come from a professional sports background, played college tennis in the US in Chicago. I also work with a lot of professional athletes in preparation. So that's also a big part of my work, to give something back to the community that I have, and also to give something back to my own roots. So I just enjoy doing that, and that's why I implemented that as well. That's basically my background.
Awesome. So you, if I remember correctly, you did pursue professional tennis at one point, right?
I did. After finishing high school in Germany, I immediately started playing college tennis because it was too early for me to just start out on the professional tour immediately. I simply wasn't good enough at that point, and then I gave it a real go after finishing in the US and played for a couple of years on the professional tour, at least tried. Obviously, I maybe with the training regimen I followed back then, it wasn't ideal because I did it pretty much all on my own, and the focus was maybe too much a bit on the athletic part with building muscle and building strength, etc. So I'm now learning from my own mistakes, and maybe can help other athletes to avoid these mistakes that I did in the past. So, yeah.
So what were those, like, what were the specific mistakes that you were doing? Were you lifting, I don't want to say too much, but were you doing different kinds of, or the wrong types of lifts and the wrong types of diets for a tennis player should specifically have?
Yeah, the strength training for a tennis player should be supplemental to basically the endurance training and maybe the explosiveness. So some basic strength, of course, is needed. But the way I did it, I thought that with my athleticism, I can basically overpower everybody and play a super aggressive style.
I bet you had a crazy serve, like super fast.
Yeah, I was playing serve and volley and chip and charge, which is not the best idea if you're like most of the time playing in Europe on ITF tournaments on clay, etc. So that's probably not the ideal solution.
Sure, it was exciting to watch though.
Yeah, that's the good part. It gave me a couple of great deals with some sponsors, but that was the best part of it. But my ranking wasn't that ideal at the time. So
right. So how did you transition into the path that you're on now? You're deep into it. Like you said, you're working on your doctorate at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So how did you transition from that into what you're doing now?
Well, I was always the kind of guy that tried to find a balance between athleticism and cognitive abilities as well. So I was always studying, basically. Never the biggest fan of school systems per se, but learning the things that I'm intrinsically interested in, which is nutrition and performance optimization. And I always did that. Basically, I started that when I was 12 years old, so it came naturally to me. And also during my professional career, which wasn't that successful, but I always was signed in at the university, doing some courses at least. Even if I was traveling, I tried to learn and study on the side. And yeah, that's how I did that. You know, after you know, how do you say, after acknowledging that I'm not going to make it into the top 100 on the ATP tour, I gave it more of a focus on my degree, but still I was always doing something at least to raise my cognitive abilities as well.
Right.
Now, is there a difference between a nutritional scientist and a nutritionist? I'm not very so aware on the subject.
Not 100% sure, but I think the degrees are a bit different, because a nutritionist, or the nutritionist thing is, I think, what they call it in the US, the degree, and the nutritional scientist is more of a specified chemist. I think there is a difference, but I can't really explain it because I don't know how exactly the courses look in the US, because I did sports science when I was in the US, but I think there is a difference, yes. So I think a nutritionist is more like what we call here a dietitian, and a nutritional scientist is, we do the lab work, a lot of analysis, and it's really more like a biochemist / chemist.
Okay.
So I have a degree in chemistry as well. So, and that's just because there is not so much additional courses that you have to do to finish that degree as well, because it's very close. So I think that's something where the nutritionist really focuses more on food components and doing nutrition plans, etc. And he's not that much into biochemistry and all those subjects.
Right. And what are you doing exactly now? Could you kind of describe it a bit more? Because that's not, I mean, you have Rubio Fuerte, where you're helping athletes, and you have awesome posts, in my opinion, that with easily digestible, but also great science explanations. Is that kind of together with what you're working on day to day, or is that kind of something on the side that you started a long time ago and you've continued to keep up with?
Well, right now I'm not in the laboratories myself. I'm going to be getting back there at the beginning of October. But during this entire COVID situation, I put that aside a bit because the conditions to work in the labs were just not acceptable for me. You know, standing for 8 hours in the labs with your mask on is not the ideal thing to do.
So tough,
right.
Yeah.
So I wasn't gonna do that. But yeah, right now I'm really focusing on the clients that I have. I have a couple of professional boxers in my mentorship that I'm working, especially during preparation, pretty much on a daily basis, getting the nutrition and other things that come along with that intact. And these Instagram posts, they don't make much of my daily work. Those just come up spontaneously, I'd say. If I have an idea, I can put that together with a couple of clicks. And this writing stuff also comes very natural to me. You know, I really enjoy sitting down and texting and stuff like that. So expressing my thoughts there, so doesn't take that much of an effort. So the main work that I'm doing right now is focusing on the athletes that I'm working with, and hopefully this winter, respectively fall, I can do much more work in the labs as well.
Got it.
Can you touch a little bit on maybe the balance that goes into being a boxer, the help that you're giving, whether it be the types of things that you explain in their diet or training, or basically just the help that you give boxers?
Well, that's really an individual subject, because obviously it makes a huge difference if you have to cut somebody back into a certain weight class, or if you have a heavy weight that doesn't have to cut weight on a specific date. That's, for example, a huge difference. But yeah, one of the major things why people typically contact me is that during intense sparring sessions, I have a special regimen that they can use to induce anti-inflammatory processes, because when you put so much stress on the body, sparring maybe 2 sessions a day, maybe 2 or 3 weeks out from the fight, that puts extreme tension and extreme pressure on the fighters. And for example, what I do with lightweight athletes in that sense is putting them into ketosis, so another metabolic state, which has anti-inflammatory purposes in that sense, and helps them to get through those extreme periods. And yeah, I think it's really a big help to work one-on-one with someone like me during those intense sparring sessions, because those boxing trainers and their fitness coaches, etc., they just push them really hard without focusing too much on the preventative part of it, because a lot of fights get canceled because of injuries and inflammation in joints and stuff like that. And it can be avoided in most cases if you just induce some small adaptations and improvements. And that's what I'm basically doing.
Right. And this is, I mean, obviously this is, people pay you for this, but you're doing this through, like you said, ketosis. Is that through diet and what they're eating, through supplements, or both?
Both typically, but the state of ketosis is achievable if you base your diet on fats, basically. Right. And moderate protein, because otherwise when the protein is too high, you'll induce a process called gluconeogenesis. So you'll synthesize carbohydrates from protein. That's not what you want. You want to keep a state of ketosis up, and that state really helps to get, as mentioned, through those sparring periods. You can't do that with heavyweight athletes, of course, because those guys train too intense and they have too high physical work ratio, if you want to call it that way. They burn too much energy to put them into a state like that. They will have trouble getting too much fat in, because we're talking about over 5,000 calories per day for people like those. And if you consume that primarily with fat, that's going to induce some digestive issues, etc. So that's not an option there. But there are still opportunities, of course, with little tricks and twists to help them achieve similar results.
Right.
Always. Now, we're primarily a football, soccer-based audience, so I would love to touch on maybe, I mean, we can dive as deep, I guess, as we want, but would you like to work with footballers in the future?
I did a couple of times, actually. I have a couple of professionals from the second major league, so the second Bundesliga in Germany, that are working with me currently as well. And I also did the dietary regimen for a couple of professional teams in the past. So yeah, I did that already a couple of times, but I'm not going to get back on doing that with a full team again. I think the individual coaching is much more what is really helping the people.
Right.
You get much better overview about what exactly is going on, and for a single person, it's not doable to do that with an entire team.
Yeah, for
so
sure.
You worked with two second Bundesliga. You worked for the entire teams, so you were giving out generalized plans, I guess.
Yeah, I got contacted from the management team of a couple of professional soccer teams. If I can put together some dietary recommendations in general for them, because they already have a cook and they can provide the food, but they wanted a professional regimen for them to perform on the highest level and basically implement that themselves without me being actually part of the team at that particular place, but doing that like from over here in Austria.
I see.
And obviously, like you said, working with a team or giving a diet plan for a team, for a chef to cook, and working one-on-one is significantly different. But is there something maybe that our audience, or the footballers that listen to here, maybe something you see footballers lack, or maybe something that hinders their performance, or something that can really help their performance?
Generally, I think in a sport like soccer, there is a huge improvement in nutritional behavior in general, because most of the teams that I know, the knowledge that they have is really not the best on those specific subjects. So they don't. If I talk to professional soccer players, they try to eat right, for whatever that means for them, but it's not that they have a specific regimen like a professional bodybuilder or a professional boxer would have in order to achieve a specific result. That's rarely the case. And I mean, meal timing and the specific optimization of certain minerals and vitamins plays a huge role for the ideal performance in a match for soccer players as well. And I think at least the elite professionals should have a private nutritional scientist or dietitian or whatever to achieve the best possible results, which I think the absolute best they have it. I don't think that Cristiano Ronaldo is working without a dietitian in his team. But yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement in general, I'd say. That's I don't know exactly why that is. I mean, those teams typically have a cook, they typically have nutritionists, but still the regimens that they do, it's really not ideal, or from what I see.
I mean, can you speak on that? What you see or what you've seen they do that you really think is not beneficial for the players?
Well, they basically follow a stigma for everyone. It's like one fit for all. They meet up with a team before a match, like 1 hour before, and have a portion of pasta for everyone, and they try to get the glycogen stores full, and then go into the match, And I don't think that's the best solution for every individual. As mentioned, ketosis, for example, is an intervention that works well for a lot of endurance athletes. And they have the opportunities to test for mineral deficiencies. They have the opportunities to test for vitamin deficiencies. And I don't know why a professional team where so much money and so much effort is there to improve the performance, why they don't do anything to work with the material that they have in order to optimize the performance of their players. I really don't know why they're not doing it.
Yeah.
I would think maybe at some certain level, like a Manchester City or a Bayern Munich, maybe, but I guess across the board, especially in teams in lower first tier or second tier, you would hope that they, like you said, they definitely have the resources to do these things. So it's quite peculiar why they're choosing not to, and they're choosing to do a one size fits all instead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I compare that, for example, to amateur bodybuilders, I mean, the worst, or not the worst, but not professional, amateurs, we're talking about amateurs here, they stick to a very individual and very precise nutritional and dietary plan, optimized with supplementation, and also with I don't know if we can talk honest here about PEDs and stuff like that, but of course also that is optimized for them. They don't have like any regrets or shame to talk about these things. They just optimize that ideally, and we're talking not about professional level. They don't have too much money, but they know that this is a vital subject, a huge component for their individual success if they want to reach the best performance that they can get. And then on the other hand, you have professional teams in the second major league where already super high budgets are paid, and they don't focus on these things. And I think also to just be more efficient with what they're doing, with like the cost and effect ratio, there's just, with minimal input, there could be much more outcome. The individual performance could be raised.
Now, I mean, I would love to talk about it, Sean. I'm sorry, but he mentioned PEDs, and I would love to know more about maybe some knowledge you have in terms of what professional athletes are doing, and what are some of the things that they get away with on a regular basis. I don't know if you know in soccer terms, if there are certain supplements that the top level guys are all taking, and then it kind of filters out, or in any sports really where people are, whether it's legal or, really on that fine line, are getting away with using these types of performance enhancing drugs.
Well, obviously I won't generalize that for everyone here, but I know that these things are used also in professional soccer firsthand. So it plays a huge role. And during rehabilitation, so after an injury also in soccer, there is no drug restrictions. So, and during that time, of course, that plays a huge role, especially when you have someone with like severe knee injuries or stuff like that. They'll basically do everything to make that guy be able to play again. And then, of course, things like growth hormone and testosterone suspension are used in order to regrow the tissue as fast as possible. That's without question. But of course, in order to induce, or, you know, you can think about it that way. If some guys have approximately 50 matches per season, it's very unlikely that they're not using some sort of PAD that raises their endurance levels.
Right.
It's very unlikely because it's just not doable for a human body. You can just rational thinking here. It's just not possible from my perspective. And I don't, I have not seen anyone on that level that is not doing anything in order to, something or anything in their power to achieve the best level that they can get.
Right. Especially in terms of recovery, it's not necessarily like, you know, bodybuilders using it, but it's more like you said, you're playing 50 games in a year. Sometimes you have 3 days rest in between. I mean, the body is not built to handle that. Now, what are some specifics in terms of performance enhancing drugs that you know that people are using in the game? I mean, I know a few years ago there was a huge thing, forgetting the steroid, but it was like a horse steroid. I'm forgetting the exact one, but there was like a big bust, especially with a lot of South American players. I know they caught them, but I'm sure, like you said, in the English Premier League and the Bundesliga, I'm sure they're just finding the loopholes and using whatever is in that gray area, like Dylan said.
Yeah, and of course, it really depends also. If you talk about anabolic steroids, for example, it depends on which esters you're using and how long you can test for these things. I know when you work with professionals and they know how long, how the tests work, it's pretty easy to curve around the tests and get away with it pretty easily. And especially when you work with peptides, which are out of the system pretty much immediately after the usage, then it's fairly easy. But as mentioned, you know, the football players use it for different purpose, mainly for recovery, to be able to play again in a shorter frequency, if you want to call it that way. And obviously things like growth hormone, for example, and certain peptides are used very often to just regenerate faster.
Right.
And then you have obviously things like erythropoietin, which would be a steroid in order to raise the red blood cells, for example. It's a typical steroid that is used in order to raise endurance performance. You have things like Winstrol, which is a steroid that doesn't raise your body weight that much. It doesn't make you too muscular, but it raises your power, your explosive, how you call it?
Explosivity.
Yeah, explosivity, explosive power, without gaining too much weight. So it just gets you stronger without an obvious.
Without an obvious, yeah.
Yeah.
In 1 month, I'm looking like you on the football field.
Yeah. So there are tips and tricks,
right?
How to do it and how not to do it.
Yeah.
So
I wonder what Adama Traore is on. Do you know who that is?
True.
Huh?
Adama Traore.
Yeah, I know that guy, the muscular guy. Isn't that the guy that is playing with oil on his arms to not get caught?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
he claims he doesn't lift. He claims he doesn't lift weights.
Yeah, but he does he does resistance stuff with. It's not. No. It's like not Kaiser training, but something like that, where it's like the more, I'm forgetting the word for it, but it's like the more you put out, the more resist. You familiar with that, Adrian? It's like I know there's one device where it's like a wheel and it's almost like a deadlift. It hooks to your hips, and the more you pull or you push up, the harder it resists.
Not exactly sure what
you're in the name of it, but anyway, I've seen him doing that. But either way, he's freaking jacked. and
Yeah, he's in shape.
he's playing every week. So I don't know how he's not. He's gaining muscle. He's not losing it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think he appears very muscular on photos. He's I don't think he's that heavy, because then he would appear slow on the field. But I think he's very, very jacked and very athletic, obviously.
Very fast. I think the fastest footballer at the moment.
Yeah, he looks like a sprinter from the Olympics or something.
Yeah, or running back.
Yeah, he does look like a running back, man. Give him the ball.
Yeah, I mean, so let's go in. I mean, maybe we talk about it's so personalized, but what Dylan and I eat or take. But what are thoughts about like something Dylan and I consistently take? Protein post workout, post training session. Personally, I take creatine every day, 5 grams. I've just heard or read things about that helps with the immune system, recovery. ATP doesn't really. In football, that's so quick, that's gone. But I feel for more recovery and the immune system, that, yeah, for me, that's one of the main reasons that I'm sticking with creatine. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Creatine is just another phosphate that you have in your muscle cells. So it basically recovers ATP faster. Gives you more energy potential, so that definitely makes sense also for soccer players. I mean, you're holding more weight in your body when you supplement creatine, because it is hygroscopic, so it's going to pull water into your muscle cells and make you more full, more rounder look, if so to say. But that definitely makes sense. It's a supplement that works pretty much for every athlete. And supplementing protein, of course, also makes sense. I mean, for a soccer player, I don't think the calorie intake is typically that high. So most of the protein can be covered with natural foods as well. But supplementing a high quality whey protein, like an isolate or something after workout, that's perfectly usable as well. And then, yeah, other than that, I think for a soccer player, just a healthy diet based on natural whole foods, with the right balance of what exactly works for the individual, with proof of concept. So it's a bit trial and error if you work better on high fat or high carbohydrates for endurance sports. There's both. So it's an individual question. But if you focus on the basics of a healthy nutrition, natural whole foods, like animal-based protein with medium fat content and some high quality carbohydrates, you'll be good to go. And then adjusting that with the right supplementation, because we always have to think about the fact that food quality is on a general decline. So the mineral and vitamin content of the foods that we buy from the supermarket is constantly decreasing. So the relevance of supplementation raises along with it. So especially when you have a high physical expenditure that comes or gets super relevant. So supplementation maybe could be adjusted with things like magnesium, vitamin K2 and vitamin D and all those essentials, especially when you're referring to raising your immunity as well, which makes sense with the protein. I mean, the immune system that we have bases on immune structures, so you need protein for that, obviously. But things like vitamin D and K2 and magnesium, for example, would be things that make sense to supplement along with it.
I think there's a common misconception amongst, I guess, maybe lower level athletes and even maybe higher level athletes, to get your carbs from rice or pastas, very basic things. So can you tell us maybe why you would feel that that's probably a major misconception and how you would change that for athletes?
Yeah, that's a bit of a controversial subject, but I don't think that any sort of processed carbohydrate should be the base of someone's diet. And when we talk about white rice, for example, or pasta, we're talking about a refined carbohydrate in flour or that white rice. And whenever you refine something and take away the micronutrients and vitamins basically of a food, and all that's left is the carbohydrates, you're going to deplete your metabolism of those vitamins and minerals, because those carbohydrates don't metabolize themselves. You need endogenous vitamins and minerals to metabolize those. And it just makes more sense to have that in your food already. So going with whole foods. So for example, if you want to go for carbohydrate dense foods, nevertheless, maybe brown rice or potatoes would be the better solution. If it has to be high in carbohydrates. Still, you can use some or a bit of white rice right before a match, for example, because otherwise it's a bit conflicting with the high fiber content that you have in those other foods, and you don't want to have a full stomach when you're going onto the pitch.
Right.
So right before a match, it might make sense to have some sort of processed carbohydrate along with the right supplementation to rebalance the potential micronutrient depleting effect. But other than that, after a match or as a general basis of the diet, it makes sense to focus on the whole foods that are not processed.
Right.
That would be my recommendation in that sense.
Yeah,
right.
That makes perfect sense. Another thing that I find just from looking at Rubio Fuerte is you've highlighted oils quite a few times. I think that's another thing that goes overlooked, even not necessarily in athletes. So can you tell us maybe about which oils you would use, which ones you wouldn't, and why one would be so much better than the other?
Yeah, sure. First of all, when we talk about extraction of a fat from a certain food, we're talking about a step of processing again. That's the first thing that we have to notice. So it's not ideal to consume extracted fats from my perspective. It's not ideal to consume or base your diet on any form of processed food, and oils fit into that list. Now there's a huge difference between seed oils and what I call fruit oils. You need much more energy and much more pressure to extract a fat from, for example, something like a sunflower seed, compared to fat that is not in the seed but in the fruit itself, like in an avocado or an olive. So that process of processing is not that severe like when you extract it from the seed. The seed is the part of the plant that the plant doesn't want you to eat, because that's for reproduction, and that's also why the anti-nutrient and phytotoxin density in those components is that high. You don't have that in those fruits. And that's also why the fat distribution from omega-3 to omega-6, for example, in seeds typically is not as good as you have it in fruit oils. It's not ideal for consumption. So if you want to consume an oil, I would go with something that is extracted from a fruit, like the olive or avocado, or you go with something more neutral, like a saturated fat that's coming from animals. So if you have something like lard or butter, that's perfectly to use as well. Yeah.
What about coconut oil?
That fits into that list as well.
Same thing, right?
That's a saturated fat as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and also in terms of eating whole foods or processed foods, in this case, processed foods are usually filled with these seed oils, correct? Which
often, it's easy to produce refined carbohydrates and seed oils. It's cheap, and it also has a positive feedback loop in terms of its nutrient depleting effect. So you can sell cheap foods and upsell that with a costly medical intervention afterwards, basically. That's healthcare 101.
Yeah, for sure.
So not the best option. I mean, those seed oils typically are omega-6 dominant. So they're putting your balance of omega-3 and omega-6 out of range. So the pro and anti-inflammatory processes in your body. You need inflammation to a certain degree to fight infections, for example. But if it's getting out of control and you get omega-6 dominant, it puts your arachidonic cycles out of range. That's the process where omega-3 and omega-6 components are metabolized. And once that happens, you get into a state of chronic inflammation with all sorts of negative effects that you don't want to have. So it really makes a lot of sense to also, especially for soccer players or professional athletes as well, to get a good ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. So yeah, also that's also a subject with the supplementation. So omega-3 supplementation can make a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, there's so, I mean, I personally have been very, I mean, I've spoken to you outside of the podcast that I'm very interested into nutrition, but there's so much, there's always a million things and new science coming out. Yeah, I mean, we could dive deeper on that. Or what about something like, I mean, caffeine and obviously its performance enhancing effects, but as well as when you overuse caffeine, the detriment it does to your body or has on your body.
Well, caffeine is a stimulant, and you can use that to your advantage or to your disadvantage, depending on the dosage and the frequency that you're using it. It can make sense to use that punctual, or how do you say, to a specific event to raise your performance along with other stimulants as well. So if you have something like stack that with taurine and piperine, for example, right before a match, and get another.
Stack that with what?
Taurine and piperine, for example. I don't know if piperine is the right English term, but that's pretty much an extract that you get from black pepper, another stimulant component. Yeah. And those have reinforcing effects. So if you combine those components, you can raise the effect without using one component in a super high dosage, which is pretty much the onset for side effects. That's also what typically induces the side effects with PEDs. If you have the opportunity to combine certain components in low dosages to maximize their effect and make an exponential effect by just using different components that play with each other, it makes a lot more sense than, for example, supplementing more caffeine. That's typically not what you should do. But yeah, you can use that to your advantage if you use it right before a match as a stimulant, for example. But if you're depending on it just to for your cognitive abilities and
to wake up in the morning,
12 cups of coffee per day, that's not going to be the best solution.
Sure. Another thing, Don and I wanted to speak about. I mean, we're both definitely proponents of eating animal proteins and whatnot, and are aware of maybe a lot of, not fake news, but there's factory farming and stuff is not a good thing, but there's also a lot of fake or false information out there putting a vegan diet is healthier than eating animal fats, but then you have all this processed food in these diets. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, generally, I'm not 100% against a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. I think if you base your diet on natural whole foods, that's the basis of everything. And if that's animal-based or plant-based or somewhere in between, isn't that much, or is a slight difference. But that's pretty much the basis. I think the sweet spot for like most of the population is somewhere in between. So a combination of unprocessed whole animal-based and unprocessed plant-based foods. So vegan diets have their place, for example, for people with certain preconditions. So certain cancer types obviously benefit from a vegan diet, for example. And if you have someone with a phenylketonuria, which is an amino acid metabolization malfunction, there's almost no other option than a vegan diet in order to have some sort of life quality left in that particular sense. So vegan diets have their place, but this huge mainstream attack on animal-based protein is, from my perspective, more an attempt to force people into artificial products that are once again easy and cheap to produce. And yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't want to go into this conspiracy thing too much and go too crazy with my claims here. But I see, very negative trend. So I can only agree with what you intended to say there.
Yeah,
it's funny because I've just from personal experience talking to people who say that they've tried or they've gone vegan for a few weeks, or they've tried to go vegan, and they always claim like, I feel much better. And it seems to me it's because you've increased your vegetable, fruit, and natural foods consumption way up from what you were. But now, like you said, you have these products like, I don't know if it's just US based, Sean, but I'm sure there's many popular products throughout, but one of the biggest ones in America is Beyond Meat. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah,
and
you have here,
okay. So you have people like Kevin Hart promoting it and stuff, and they promote it as healthy and a good alternative source. And I mean, what would you say? What is actually in these kinds of things, and why is that not a good source of, or it's not even a source of, but a good replacement for protein, animal-based protein foods?
Well, that answer is pretty easy, because when you talk about unprocessed whole foods, those foods don't need an ingredient list.
Right.
If you have natural whole food, it consists of the meat, it consists of the apple, it consists of the spinach, whatever it is. But if you talk about the Beyond Meat, you can't produce that without a chemist like myself in order to get those components with the right bliss point and the right consistency in order to make that consumable for people. It's an ultra processed food bunched together of all the trash that you can think of to achieve the consistency and it's not a good product, and that's the really bad thing. I think that's also what induces a lot of confrontation between this animal-based and plant-based community, because the plant-based itself is not the problem, but products like Beyond Meat, those are the problem. You don't want to have that in your diet. It's not better than the ultra processed cheeseburger that is in that you can get in the supermarket as well. Whenever something needs like I don't know, a long list of ingredients where most of the population can't even pronounce what is on that list and never have heard of it, then it's an indicator of something weird going on. So to say.
It's a nice way to put it.
I know that there's some websites. I think I used to use one at one point. I can't remember what it was, but it was basically you would scan the barcode and then it would talk about the ingredients and what they are, and then give it a score or something like this. Have you ever heard of these types of apps or websites?
Yeah, I think they're testing in some countries also. Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah. Also, that's a good thing. That's the thing with those products, because in most countries they rank that as super preferable over animal-based products based on the apps that you already mentioned, and that is severe misinformation. That's nothing else. That's where it gets harming, and where it's not like funny or anything in that sense. It's just severe misinformation. And if people think that they can substitute meat products with this Beyond Meat stuff and think they can health-wise get away with it in the long run, they are on a very bad path.
Right.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah, totally agree on that.
Another thing we haven't mentioned yet or touched on, I guess, is sugar and sugar consumption. Of course, we're picking your brain right now, so I know a lot of these things can be quite generalized and such. But can you just talk about maybe are there ways to get sugar in, or is sugar always bad, or are there ways to get sugar in if it's in certain foods, or I guess in sweets and these processed foods? Obviously, we've talked about the dangers of them, but should people be very afraid of their sugar intake? And maybe what are some ways to break it for those who are, kind of addicted to the consumption?
well, sugar addiction is another subject, another full subject. But if it's about the sugar in itself, that's not the threat. The threat is the processing that we already discussed. So sugar in whole fruits and whole foods is a complete different story than refined sugar, refined sucrose that you can buy in this in the supermarket. And there's not much of a difference to refined starch products like white rice and refined sugar that you can buy in the supermarket, because those starches are nothing else than a long chain of glucose molecules, which get broken down easily by the body without putting any energy in that by an enzyme called amylase. So there's not much of a difference. So the only difference, or the sugar in itself or the carbohydrates are not the problem. How many you need, or if you should consume carbohydrates, depends on your individual purpose and what you're trying to do. What we have to keep in mind is that carbohydrates are a non-essential macronutrient. So you can live without alimentary consumption of carbohydrates. That's what non-essential means. Right. Essential means that you have to alimentary consume a food component in order to keep up all body functions. And that's not the case with carbohydrates, because we already talked about gluconeogenesis. You can generate carbohydrates from, for example, protein. But that doesn't make carbohydrates or sugar in itself a bad thing. It depends on the context. And I'm not arguing against whole fruits or whole vegetables at all. What is another subject, what you already mentioned, is sugar addiction. So if someone is trying to recover or break the frame of sugar addiction, it can make sense to cut out fruits and starchy products as well over a certain period of time, to just not trigger back the old behavior. Because what those people are addicted to is not the sugar, but a dopamine response in their brain. And you can trigger that response with sugars from fruit, for example, as well. And then the fruit will trigger back the old behavior of cravings for certain sweets. So it can make sense to cut those out over a shorter period of time, but not for the vast, or not in general. Fruit and vegetables have a place in human nutrition, that's for sure. Right.
Now, what about, does honey fit in because it's not processed, but it is extremely high sugar content. Is that, would you put that in the fruit side of sugar, or would you put that in the refined sugar side of things?
Yeah, in moderate consumption, even honey is fine to consume, because it's a natural product. You have a lot of enzymes in the honey as well. So if it really isn't that, there's honey that is processed, so which is heated up in order to basically give it a longer shelf life, for example.
Right.
And if you do that, you destroy enzymes and get the benefits of the natural product away once again. And that's not something that you want to, that's not something that you want to have. But the natural honey is perfectly fine.
I luckily have a bee guy.
A natural, is it the same with a natural maple syrup as well?
I'm not 100%. No, the maple syrup is an extract of that tree, right? I'm not 100% sure what that exactly is.
The maple tree, yeah.
Yeah, no, that would be, you need a lot of energy to get that sugar out of that plant. I wouldn't, that pops up a couple of questions on that product. So not too supportive with maple syrup.
You don't think pancakes and maple syrup is healthy?
I wouldn't go to IHOP too much.
400 carbs before breakfast, before noon. Another,
skip that.
Yeah. Shout out all Americans. Another. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Rhonda Patrick. She's kind of.
Yeah.
Dylan and I are huge fans of what she has to say, and I think she's very insightful. But she has, especially with the recent pandemic, but beforehand, vitamin D, she spoke about, particularly with immune or issues with the lungs. And I found, in my personal case, for whatever reason, because we play football throughout the winter, I always tended to get this this dry cough. I mean, this is going deep into it, but ever since supplementing with vitamin D and vitamin C throughout the winter, that cough I do not get anymore. And do you have any insight into why it's important for people to take vitamin D, number one, or maybe what vitamin D does to our bodies and why it's important to supplement it?
Well, first of all, vitamin D is not really a vitamin. It's from its structure, it's more a hormone. It's an androgen, basically, or a steroid, better to say, not an androgen. It's a steroid. So it's based on cholesterol. And you synthesize that mainly by exposing yourself to sunlight from cholesterol. Well, vitamin D is a complex subject because it has a lot of functions in the body. It's basically like what the liver is to the metabolism is vitamin D to in terms of hormones or vitamins, so to say. There are plenty of things that it does, but it plays a huge role in immune defense, which is maybe something why it helped in your particular situation. But of course, it also with the how do you say, the physiology of the bones, for example, it plays a huge role in the mineralization of the bones as well. And it has a lot of benefits if you keep your vitamin D intake in range. So that's also why a question pops up. If you want to raise the immunity of people, why you shut them down into their apartments? That's a vital question in that sense.
And this just came up in my head. I was listening to a podcast today that reminded me of, do you recommend, or where would you recommend someone does like a blood panel to see maybe things that they're lacking? I mean, is that something that you do with the athletes that you work with? Because otherwise it's very difficult to see what you're lacking in terms of minerals and vitamins.
Yeah, I do it with a combination of individual feedback of the athletes and with blood panels, because those blood panels typically just refer to one specific parameter, which is not enough to supervise the state of a component in your body and the mineral or vitamin status. So you do that in a combination of asking critical and specific questions on how someone feels and the feedback of the athlete, and combine that with what you see on the lab panel. I'm not a big, I'm a scientist myself, but I'm not a big fan of those scientists that, just focus on lab panels and lab parameters. That's not how it works, because if someone comes to you and, says he doesn't feel right and the blood panel looks fine, and doctors send them back home because everything seems to be okay, I don't think that's the right attempt. You want to ask critically, and you want to look for a constructive solution for that. So, and you can sometimes, for example, with complex components like vitamin D, also the ideal level fluctuates a lot. So it can be that the vitamin D level is in the lower range of okay, but still for that individual, it still might be deficient and might be beneficial to try to raise that. And that's why I go with the combination of those. And if you have like slight anxiety symptoms, slight or tendency to get the cold easily, and typical vitamin D issues, it doesn't hurt to just try to raise the levels and see if it has a beneficial effect. If you don't completely go crazy with dosages, there's no harm in just trying to focus on those essential components nevertheless.
Right. Yeah. There's, like you said, it's very personalized with all that. But that was something I've been interested in possibly doing, but maybe working with someone like yourself, just to go through to optimize myself and performance best.
Yeah, you have, you always have to keep in mind that there's a lot of like we already got into that area of conspiracy a bit, but never mind. But they are always on the decline. For example, if you look at the ideal levels of, for example, of a component like testosterone, the ideal level decreased, recommended by the WHO, decreased for the past 10 years every year. So someone that is now in the ideal levels of testosterone would 10 years ago would have been severely deficient. So you always have to think critically a bit, and especially when we talk about such vital components, don't generalize these things and just go with a bit of trial and error, as long as you're not inducing some severe side effects potentially. But there's room for improvement, and you always have to be critical with the information that you're getting.
Sure. I also want to talk about, we haven't really touched on it that much, about Rubio Fuerte, the kind of brand you've built on Instagram. Where did that start from?
Well, the name Rubio Fuerte, first of all, means strong blonde guy, so it refers to me. That's a name that a Peruvian friend of mine gave me back in high school.
Okay.
So long time ago. That's why when I got that alias and used it for my own purposes and started using it. And yeah, this brand building stuff that just came to me. Basically, I focused primarily on the work that I do in the labs and just started to write. I always wrote those kind of articles that I write on Instagram. The only difference is that now people have access to that work.
I see.
And I have better opportunity to post stuff on much more frequently, because when you have to publish something from the university with other co-authors and doing research and publish a paper, the frequency is not nearly as high, because you have a lot of proofreading, you need a lot of testing and stuff. And Instagram, or that sort of work, has the benefit that I can just go for it and speak also about my personal opinion, and just not try to rationalize or do everything conform with potential conflicting parties that are trying to look critical on it. I just I'm completely fine with people disagreeing with me, and so I can stand for my own words and just express my thoughts. That's what I use it for. Of course, that's a bit restricted these days as well, so you can't speak there's no complete freedom to talk about certain subjects without getting banned from the platform. But still, I enjoy writing, and that's why I built that. The brand building, doing that more professionally, just came to me by rising audience, just by posting stuff on the platform, basically.
So for someone who is very skilled and educated in a subject, or many of subjects in a common theme, what advice would you give them to starting a platform like you would do, whether it's the amount of posts or the type of posts or the amount of engagement, the amount of words used, pictures used? What are some things that you found really worked for you, and that you would advise people who want to do kind of the same thing to do as well?
I wouldn't give too detailed advice on these things.
We can't give your secrets away. No, of course.
No, there's no secret in that sense. It's the thing is that primarily you have to do something that you enjoy doing, because the basic thing is consistency. So if you want to build, I think that's my opinion, I'm not a professional brand builder or a social media marketer or anything like that, but I think what people like seeing is someone that is consistent and obviously enjoys the stuff and makes it somehow. What is another factor? Of course, Instagram is primarily about the visual effect, so make that appealing to the eye in some way. I like drawing cartoons, which comes into play on my Instagram feed as well.
Do you draw those?
You draw all of these?
No, not all of them, but some are my own work. So sometimes
cool.
I don't have the time and just put together some files that I find online that have free access. And sometimes I draw stuff on my own when I do that like in a meditative way, so to say.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So I think the consistency is the main thing.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not a marketer in that sense, so I can't give specific information on how you build a brand in a specific niche. But I think contacting people in a specific niche on a platform like Instagram is not that hard as well. So people, if you have like a subject like medicine, nutrition, or soccer, it's not too hard to find the audience on a platform like Instagram.
Right.
So if you have the time to put the work in that, interacting with these people is pretty easy on a platform like that. And then once again, it's about consistency. You can't expect to build up a brand within a week. So if you're not planning on doing that for the next couple of years, I don't think there's a huge point of starting it. Anyways, it's just it won't work that way.
Right.
It's a great point.
It's a long process. So here at Footwork, we always talk about making your own path. I mean, that's what this podcast is about. People that kind of made their own unique path, whether that's in soccer or outside of football, like yourself. And what does make your own path mean to you?
Well, pretty much what I was already talking about. I enjoy everything that I do. I come from a professional sports background. I still train basically like a professional. I try to still do that. I just enjoy these things, and I enjoy the drawing. I enjoy at some point when I have the free access to the labs and don't get too restrictive by certain interventions. I like being in the labs, and I enjoy when people get better and improve their performance based on my work. That's the best feedback that I can get. And when I have people fighting for championships, or if I have people that get from the second major league to the first major league and signing their first contract on the highest level, and they come back to me and say that's also related to you and your expertise, that's the best feedback. So that's what's driving me forward.
Right. Love that. I love that. So yeah, anything else, Till? I mean, I think it's a perfect place.
I loved it. I feel like we just picked his brain, so I'm sorry in a way.
No, that's perfectly fine. And just jumping from one subject to the other a bit, but that's perfectly fine.
A little bit of everything.
Exactly. All over the portfolio.
Yeah. And where can people contact you if they're interested in working with you? Or how can people contact you?
The easiest way is to go onto my Instagram handle at Rubio Fuerte. I don't have like free spots for professional athletes in the moment because I'm completely full with that. But like one-on-one consultations to give something back to the audience is always possible. You can apply by just sending me a direct message on Instagram, for example, and then there is the option of working together with me in a session. That's always possible.
Right. Awesome.
Amazing.
So until next time,
keep moving forward.
Keep learning.
Make it your own path.
There you go.
Love it.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Rubio Fuerte.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Footwork is sponsored by ourselves. Also, Kong Fitness and Merchant Designs, baby. Follow us on Instagram at Footwork_podcast. Twitter is at Footwork Podcast. YouTube and Facebook, just check out Footwork Podcast, search it. Email us if you need anything, any questions at footworkpodcast@gmail.com. And remember, plug, pass. Tell your parents, Amazon delivery guy, mailman, I don't know who, just tell them. Like, subscribe, review, all of it helps. Danke.